The Endless Toil, a Herculean Sleep Chronicle. Imagine, if you'll, an era long since past when the gods strolled the earth and giants wrought myths whose names would live on forever. We'll now explore the legend of a man who defined courage and endurance, the hero that embodies the ultimate strength of will, Hercules. Hercules. The Greeks called him Heracles, which roughly translates to Hera's praised one, an ironic appellation, for his eventual downfall would be brought on by Hera herself. This tale starts amid the secret longings and artful schemes of the divine realm. Among the gods, Zeus possessed not only great power but also tremendous desires. He became enamored with the beauty and the virtue of the mortal girl named Alcmene. Amphitryon, the highly esteemed general of Thebes, was her husband. This was impossible for the mighty Zeus, even when faced with the mortal bonds of a marriage. While Amphitryon fought to avenge his brothers-in-law, Zeus came up with a devious scheme. He then asked Helios to lengthen the hours of available darkness, guaranteeing that a single night would seem like 3. After assuming the form and presence of her husband Amphitryon, Zeus came to Alcmene as if returning from valiant battle. Alcmene accepted him as her husband Amphitryon and willingly allowed him into her arms. In the course of this carefully planned ruse by the gods, the future Heracles was conceived. By chance, on the same day or the next, Amphitryon came home again from winning his latest military engagement. He too lay with Alcmene. Alcmene gave birth to twin boys as a result of Zeus's dalliance with her. Iphicles was born to mortal Amphitryon, the latter being the ruler of the village of Thebes in Boeotia. Alcaeus was Hercules, born to Zeus as his demigod son. Hera, Zeus's jealous and vigilant spouse, couldn't help but take interest in the matter. Hera's wrath at Zeus's affairs knew no limits, and she aimed it at her husband's promised son. Enthralled by his son's promise, Zeus declared to a gathering of the gods that Alcmene's near birth would bring forth an illustrious heir for the family line of Perseus. Hera immediately used Zeus's declaration to her advantage. She was aware that the wife of Sthenelus, who was a cousin to Hercules, was expecting a child as well. In a fury, Hera commanded Eileithyia to obstruct Alcmene's labor but to hasten the birth of Eurystheus. Eileithyia blocked Alcmene from giving birth by perching at the door and locking her own legs and arms together. Alcmene suffered intense pain for a whole week before giving birth. Galanthus' quick wit managed to undo the enchantment that was afflicting Alcmene. When the pains became unbearable, Galanthus hurried out and spread word that Alcmene had delivered. The birth goddess jumped to her feet, and in that very moment, the curse was broken. Alcaeus and Iphicles were born. Hera, upset with Galanthus for deceiving her, changed her into a weasel and cursed her to crawl and deliver her young by her mouth. Thus it came to pass that weakness and poor health permitted Eurystheus, an offspring of Zeus by no means, to ascend the throne as the king, while Hercules found himself obliged to obey. There is also symbolism in the name Heracles, which speaks to the rivalry between Hera and Zeus in the earlier days of Hercules' life. People suggest that the name was a gesture to appease Hera after her trickery, and that its very meaning is a lingering jab at her for providing him with the challenges that would make him known the world over. Some believe that either Zeus tried to make amends for his infidelity or an oracle chose it for its meaning. Hera's spite toward him persisted just as strongly after he emerged from her womb. In the hours after both twins were born, either in a crib or on a shield in some accounts, Hera dispatched a pair of terrifying serpents to end the young boy's life. Opening his eyes to face a terrifying sight, Iphicles began crying and wildly moving his arms and legs. Yet the infant Alcaeus, already displaying his divinity, rose peaceful and interested to meet the creatures. The snakes heard the baby's approach and raised their heads to catch his scent. But the baby demigod stretched out his tiny fingers and exerted a grip that was beyond what a mortal child of his age could possess. He wrapped his hands around the snakes and, farl just as the snakes coiled their bodies around him, so he crushed them with his little hands. The serpents thrashed and strangled themselves as they curled tightly around the arms of the baby. When they arrived, they found an event that would mark their son for life. Alcaeus sat calmly while Iphicles continued to scream, his small hands clasped around the corpses of the serpents. Amphitryon realized immediately that their son was something extraordinary. A second legend recounts how Hercules gained some immortality but proves once again how Hera's attitude toward him was often paradoxical. At Zeus's instruction, either Hermes or the god himself whisked the child Alcaeus to Olympus while Hera slept. The babe was put to her breast and began nurse. Hera suddenly woke to see an unfamiliar child feeding at her breast. She snapped him off her breast and his milk splashed across the sky, eventually taking the form of our own cherished Milky Way. Yet the smallest quantity that he was able to consume was enough to grant Hercules superhuman strength and seal his destiny, even though Hera clearly resented the idea of him becoming divine. Hercules proved to be a difficult young man to raise. Hercules' incredible strength was clear, but his unruly nature may be traced to Zeus or amplified by Hera's continuous animosity. Amphitryon saw to it that Hercules received the most prestigious education that a boy of noble family might expect. His stepfather taught him how to operate a chariot. The son of the god Hermes, Autolycus, schooled Hercules in the art of wrestling. The archer king of Oechalia, Eurytus, taught him to use the bow, and the mastery of this weapon would be vital in his future adventures. Castor, twin brother of Pollux and distinguished horseman, showed him how to ride and use a sword. Rhadamanthus, the wise brother of Minos, also taught him the doctrine of righteousness. Attempting to teach him music, sadly, ended in tragedy for one of his instructors. Another of Apollo's sons, Linus, who may have been Orpheus's own brother, tried to instruct Hercules in the art of playing the lyre. Hercules possessed great strength, yet lacked the temperament needed for precise performance on the lyre. Accounts vary. Some claimed that Hercules was prone to unskillfulness. Others suggested he found teaching frustrating, or it may have been that Linus was harsh and quick to chastise his student for simple errors. Something must have set him off, and he became enraged right then. Suddenly enraged, Hercules grabbed his lyre and, using its edge or a nearby stool, struck the musician Orpheus's head, killing him immediately. However, whether a mistake or simply his unbridled character, the consequence of Hercules' rage ended in serious repercussions. Amphitryon believed that sending Hercules away from Thebes was the right action to ensure his son would keep on the right path and to safeguard the people of the city. He was exiled to Mount Cithaeron, there to work as a shepherd and take care of animals. This simple lifestyle away from the city was hoped to calm him and channel his tremendous abilities toward productive purposes. He became a powerful and strong-willed youth as a result of his rugged upbringing. His bravery and his readiness to defend the herds and the townspeople against dangerous beasts earned him great respect among those around him. The time came when Hercules displayed extraordinary strength as a youth. He laid the groundwork for what would later become the renowned 12 Labors. A magnificent lion, but not the fabled Nemean lion that would be the subject of more tales, was creating havoc among the herds of Amphitryon and King Thespius of Thespae. Hercules had been pursuing this lion without success for 50 days. He spent the nights at the court of King Thespius. Did he see in Hercules' greatness and believe he could produce grandchildren with similar strength and courage? The king devised a singular scheme. When Hercules pursued the lion 50 nights in a row, the king sent one or all of his daughters to Hercules' bed. He shared the wives of the Thespian king each night, and 50 sons, or 51 or 52, were given birth to. These were the Thespiades. After 50 days or so, Hercules killed the fabled lion, finding and destroying it in its cave. He donned its pelt as early evidence of the legendary Nemean lion's coat he would eventually possess. Hercules soon became involved in Thebes' politics again as his fame increased. Theban leaders had been obliged to pay a demeaning yearly livestock tax to Erginus, king of the Minyans, as vengeance for their ancestors' murder of his father. Shortly after the Minyan heralds arrived, they met Hercules. Hercules angrily punished the Minyan heralds by severing their ears, noses, and hands. This, Hercules declared, was the city's annual gift in return for the humiliating tribute Erginus had forced on them. Of course, Erginus was furious and assembled his armed forces to attack Thebes. Desperate, The Thebans saw that they'd no chance of victory with their limited means and were forbidden by the minions to use their arms. As such, Hercules arose to the emergency and took charge. He inspired the young Thebans and gathered soldiers from various Theban temples, or, so the story goes, he was given armor and weapons by Athena herself. He guided the Thebans in a well-conceived yet harsh military effort. He surprised the army of Orchomenus in a location resembling Thermopylae and then led his troops to victory over King Erginus. The minions were soundly defeated and Thebes was relieved of the weighty contribution to Orchomenus. However, Orchomenus lost this advantage and now paid Hercules twice the amount he would have to Thebes. As a thank you for his efforts in freeing Thebes, Creon, the king of Thebes, presented Hercules with the ultimate gift. He was promised Megara, the king's firstborn daughter, in marriage. Accepting Creon's offer, Hercules began a new chapter of his life filled with happiness. He and Megara established a life in Thebes and they had a number of sons, with accounts often mentioning 3 but sometimes 8. Other sources refer to him and Megara as the parents of Thermachus, Creontiades, and Dacun. During this time, Hercules found happiness with Megara and seemed as content as he ever had in his life of strife. Still filled with resentment, Hera remained determined to see Hercules suffer. The goddess Hera simmered in her malice, watching Hercules from Mount Olympus as he basked in his family life and fame. Hercules' happiness being the outcome of Zeus' infidelity only added to her anger. She hatched a plan to wreak the worst possible harm as she could upon him. To inflict the greatest torment and fear upon Hercules, Hera brought about a frenzied state, known as Alyssa, that overcame him. This disease brought on a raging madness that drove Hercules to see his loved ones as his enemies. A ravaging insanity made him perceive those closest to him as strangers. To Hercules, the mere sight of his wife and children filled him with a dread of those who might cause him harm. Narrations of the events that ensued afterwards are harrowing. Hercules unleashed his unstoppable power and unleashed it upon the people closest to him, his loved ones. He murdered his children in various ways, some stories telling that he hurled them into a fire or used his weapons to strike them. Despite Megara's pleas or attempts to stop him, Hercules sank into such a rage that he ultimately killed his own wife as well. Iphicles and his son had witnessed Hercules' atrocities in some stories, and he's said to have killed some of them. On the other hand, Iolaus usually manages to survive the tragedy. His sanity returned and he was confronted with the horrific aftermath of a terrible massacre. His children and wife had been taken from him by the blade of his own destructive fury. The realization of what he had wrought and the devastation it's caused brought him to his knees in grief. The emotional upheaval he experienced was much worse than anything his body had ever withstood. He was utterly broken. Some accounts say that the shame and defilement he felt prompted a deep retreat from society, and he even considered ending his life to wipe away the intimations of his deeds. Many times, his lifelong friend Theseus visited him and encouraged him to undergo purification rituals to absolve himself of what he had done. It may be that Ascanius was inspired by Amphitryon or the understanding that self-killing would only intensify his destruction. Hercules felt he needed the guidance of the Delphic oracle to help him know how to atone for his heinous act and find inner calm. The Pythia, priestess of Apollo, spoke just as the god instructed her after she inhaled the fumes rising from the ground. Hercules undertook a journey to Tiryns in order to atone for the murder of his own kin, as he had, unwittingly, been robbed of his rulership by the scheming of his cousin Eurystheus. Clearly this was to be a long test, to last no fewer than 10 years and, by some accounts, later at the instigation of Hera, extend to 12. He was required to undertake whatever burdens or chores Eurystheus would instruct him to accomplish. Successfully finishing these labors ensured Hercules would be absolved and furthermore, granted eternal life. Therefore, burdened by the weight of his grief but determined to clear his name, Hercules embarked on the journey to Tiryns, surrendering himself to a king whose character was so shameful that it was his deeds, not his heritage, which stood out. He took this first step into a journey that would define his future and immortalize him. The 12 labors of Hercules. Eurystheus, spurred on by Hercules' nemesis, Hera, created a series of challenges so remarkable that their outcome seemed doubtful at best. Hercules was sent on journeys across every land on Earth and, in some cases, descended into the realm of ancient myth, the twilight of death. Every task was conceived with increasing danger, a challenge to the renowned skills and character of Hercules. Fear and excitement hung heavy in the air as Hercules, a man whose face bore a haunted expression, made his presence known to the frail king. Eurystheus quickly grew afraid any time Hercules came near him. He was said to quake like a frightened animal each time Hercules stepped onto Mycenaean soil, and thus he made use of an intermediary, Coprius, a man who carried the moniker of Dung Man, mimicking the humble role he was assigned in the favor of his royal overlord. No matter what he faced, Hera was never far from Eurystheus' mind, conspiring to make each of Hercules' labors as dangerous as possible. The first labor, the Nemean lion, a performing battle. Despite now being under the dark cloud of madness that shrouded his sanity and plunged him into grief at the loss of his wife and children, Hercules faced his cousin, King Eurystheus, in the throne room of Mycenae. Eurystheus preferred to conduct business with his nephew from a safe distance because the fear of Hercules' power coursed through him along with a smug sense of his superior position. It was by matchless thievery that Hera, the queen of all gods and the resolute tormentor of Hercules, tainted Eurystheus' attempt to secure his throne. Coprius, barely concealing his own trepidation, issued the first order with the air of a hunter out to claim his prey. Hercules was commanded to enter the valley of Nemea in search of the monstrous lion, bring it down and bring back its hide as proof of victory. This animal was no ordinary quarry for a mortal hunter with any degree of proficiency. The very mention of the Nemean lion sent chills down the collective spine of the population of the Peloponnese region. It claimed descent that traced back to a veritable gallery of fearsome ancestors. Others claimed it was the bloody heir of Typhon and Echidna, creatures so terrifying they gave birth to other creatures of nightmares. Some believed that it was the progeny of Orthrus, the two-headed hound of Geryon and the Chimera itself. It was also believed that it had come from heaven, cast down to the land by the goddess Selene. The crack of its enormous voice was rumored to cause the mountains themselves to tremble. However, the trait that rendered every form of worldly armament ineffective was its powerful hide. This luxurious golden-brown hide defied all mortal weapons. It was said to possess an impenetrable shielding that resisted all attempts of harm to it by means of weapons made of metal or stone. Whatever weapon was used, it would be rendered ineffectual by the power of the lion's hide. Nemea was now subject to the terrible rule of the most powerful, untouchable beast known. The land was barren. The herds disappeared from the meadows and the atmosphere was laden with an ominous feeling. Weighed down by his task, Hercules left Mycenae for the remote hours of the night. He made his way steadily to the valley of Nemea in the district of Argolis. Alone and huge, he tramped across the landscapes of ancient Greece. Everything fell still as he drew near the dark and deserted valley. However, he also took notice of the absence of any bird calls, the skeletal remains of animals deliberately stripped bare of their flesh, and the haunted, wary expressions of the villagers who struggled alongside him in the brutality suffered at the lion's claws. The closer he got to the valley, he passed through the village of Cleone. He took refuge with a village man named Malorchus. His hut was plain and his features told the unmistakable tale of suffering wrought by the lion that had probably stalked his animals and dwindled his scant revenues. Malorchus was preparing to make a humble offering to the goddess Hera in hope that she would ward off the lion, or as a tribute to the memory of his child. Seeing the desperate man, Hercules was moved to mercy by the thought that his work was born from a desire to save the blameless and atone for his own errors. Hercules addressed Malorchus in a voice that was both grave and kind. Hercules told him his purpose and convinced Malorchus to put off his sacrifice. Hercules urged Malorchus to remain at the temple for the next 30 days. When I come back leading the trophy of its skin, then you and I'll honor Zeus by jointly offering thanks for the strength he granteth me. If by the 30-day mark you'll understand that I've fallen to my enemy. If you don't find me alive by then, lend your head in my honor. Malorchus was deeply impressed by Hercules and felt that there was a chance for good news, so he readily accepted the agreement. Hercules journeyed deep into Nemea after saying goodbye to Cleone. Stillness seeped through the valley while a heavy dread filled the air. He spent many days following the lion and discovered only its towering footprints marring the barren ground. The number of its slain prey increased as he neared the beast's territory. Hercules relied on a stout bow and sharp arrows he had received from Apollo or Eurytus, his former archery instructor. He also wielded a powerful bronze sword and carried a vast club of honed olive wood, the likes of which only a few men could hope to lift. He finally spotted the Nemean lion. It was more splendid and fearsome than any story could do justice to. It was a colossus of power and pride, its mane a shining crown of glory upon its kingship of beasts. Its eyes burned with intelligence and a scornful understanding of Hercules. Instantly, Hercules jerked an arrow and tensed his powerful bowstring. Hercules released the arrow with pinpoint accuracy towards the lion's side. The arrow hit the impenetrable hide and shattered into pieces, its tip dulled by the impact. Again and again, Hercules fired his arrows, but the lion was somehow immune to each blow. The lion tossed its head with disdain and gave a guttural snarl that showed they were amused. He discarded his bow when he saw it wouldn't stop the lion. He unsheathed his glittering bronze sword and went straight toward the lion. At the sight of Hercules, the beast let out a thunderous roar that rattled the ground before his paws. The lion launched itself toward him like a savage flash of gold. Hercules, agile as a god, dodged the lion's attempt to jump and thrust his sword against the beast's powerful shoulder. The force drove the blade from his hand, only deflecting from the hard skin and leaving nothing but the smallest nick. Now only his club remained. It was a weapon that relied purely on sheer power to dislodge an enemy. The lion lunged forward once more, but Hercules brought down the huge wooden club with all his strength directly onto the beast's head. The impact was so powerful it would have laid low any other creature. The lion was momentarily thrown off balance, slumping slightly as if trying to shake loose any confusion. Still, the club, mighty as it was, proved no match for the beast. The blow from Hercules' club virtually shattered the wooden weapon as the chunk of wood gave way under the unearthly strength of the Nemean lion. He met the lion without any weapon. The arrows, the sword, or his famous club all proved futile. As it shook off the powerful strike, the lion let loose a guttural howl of rage. Hercules realized that the time had come for him to take action. No trick or tool could match the might of the Nemean lion, so he must rely on the very strength of his body and powers bestowed upon him by Zeus. Hercules studied the landscape and spotted the hiding place the lion had chosen, a system of caves with 2 visible entrances protected by natural walls of rock. An idea started to take shape in his thoughts. He knew that if he gave the lion room to run, it would use all its speed and power to seize the upper hand. The task at hand was to corner the lion and face it in an engagement where he could use his own power to the fullest. Hercules exerted immense strength, collecting huge rocks and piles of rubble and hauling them to block the entrance of the lion's lair. He expended immense energy to seal off one of the entrances with stones of every shape and size. The lion held its ground, seeming uncertain as to why the unusual task was occurring or simply waiting until it was safe to spring its attack. With an intake of breath, Hercules walked through the remaining passageway and found himself in pitch-black darkness. A heavy and acrid atmosphere filled the cave, heavy with the powerful smell of the large animal crouched within. Squinting in the dim light, Hercules could see the lion resting in the distance, its yellow eyes glowing fiercely in the darkness. It was cornered. The beast could no longer flee and had nowhere to go, either. The Nemean lion leaped towards Hercules with a bellow that echoed off the walls of the cave. Hercules faced the challenge without weapons, striking into the lion's heart with only the power of his 2 fists. Avoiding the first vicious swipe of the lion's gigantic and wickedly sharp claws, he caught hold of the creature and exerted his incredible grip around its thick neck and sturdy shoulders. The beast flailed its powerful limbs and bucked violently as its prowess was still a formidable threat. hot stench permeated as the lion's breath came down on him, its sharp nails leaving deep gouges on his body, but nonetheless, Hercules remained steady with his legs rooted to the ground. Here, the battle between human and beast took place amid the claustrophobic gloom. All of Hercules' muscles seemed to tense and pop as he put every last ounce of strength into the task. Hercules tightened his arms around the lion's neck, choking off the sinewy muscles that fed the bestial chest. The mighty lion tossed its head and writhed in Hercules' iron grip, its bellowing giving way to a series of harsh, guttural growls. For minute after minute, Hercules grappled with the lion, a silent yet deliberate war being waged. The only sound was his pained groans mingling with the lion's vicious snarls as their bodies scuffed across the rough stone. He noticed that the lion was starting to tire from the struggle. He could feel he was winning, but he knew it came at great cost. Methodically and determinedly, Hercules clamped down harder, his superhuman strength summoned to overcome this foe. Little by little, the king of beasts grew weary and its breaths came in sparse, labored gasps. Suddenly, the Nemean lion gave a powerful, final spasm and collapsed suddenly in Hercules' grip. His fiery eyes glazed over. He killed it in a different way, winning over the beast entirely by taking away what kept it alive. Bathed in sweat and adrenaline, Hercules finally released his now lifeless adversary into the depths of the cave. Still, he had much work left to do. He had to bring back the lion's hide. Then, with extraordinary ingenuity, Hercules found a way to remove the tough hide from the Nemean lion. Even armed with his blade and some jagged flints, he found that neither his blade nor any stone he could find in the cave could pierce the legendary lion's hide. For some moments, he sat quietly, gazing at the slain lion while the cave ringed with a heavy quiet. Finally, he had a brilliant idea as to how to kill the lion, or so the stories say, because it was Athena who often guided him that inspired the idea. The hardest and sharpest weapons to pierce the Nemean lion were the beast's own claws. The claws were as hard and sharp as the precious gemstone. Using the lion's own claw, Hercules started to meticulously scrape off the tough and durable hide from the lion's body. The job itself took a long time and was very difficult, yet the claw sliced cleanly. He eventually worked the claws through every inch of the hide until he was left holding the impressive prize. He draped the hide over his shoulders, using the lion's skull as a hood or helmet to adorn himself. The tough skin would from now on be worn as the symbol of his victory over the fierce Nemean lion. The hero emerged from the cave, the head of the Nemean lion on his shoulders and the weighty skin of the beast at his back. Hercules set out to return to the village of Cleone. 30 days from when he left, he returned triumphant to the community. Upon receiving the news, Melorchus prevailed upon Hercules' father, Immutus, to put the lord of the region into a deep sleep until the verdict was revealed. Upon seeing the hero return from the cave and display the mantle of the mighty lion, Melorchus's sorrow was instantly replaced by incredible elation and reverence. Together, they abandoned their mournful rites and replaced them with a celebration, filling the skies with prayers of gratitude and incense to Zeus Soter. Hercules went on to travel to Mycenae next. The citizens and guards around the city gates were struck with overwhelming fear and astonishment as he came into view, enveloped in the gigantic pelt, the terrible mask of the beast sitting before his own face. The king learned both that Hercules had appeared and what he was carrying. Eurystheus was completely paralyzed with fear at the prospect of facing Hercules once more. At the very moment Hercules came before him or was revealed to be in the throne room, Eurystheus was seized by panic and rushed inside a large, bronze container, known as a pithos, apparently installed there as a hiding place precisely for escape from such a formidable relative. Crumbling out of the pithos, the king begged Hercules to fetch his conquests and exhibit them away from the gates in time. Henceforth, he would demand tasks of Hercules exclusively through Copreus. Thus ended the first labor. Hercules had confronted an apparently unbeatable adversary and had triumphed over him by power and wit. Yet his king's joy was replaced with even greater trepidation. The pelt of the Nemean lion would accompany him always, reminding those around him of his prowess and warding off the dangers he would encounter along the way toward his redemption. the second labor, confronting the Lernaean Hydra, menacing multitude of head and threat. However, the second labor devised by Eurystheus was a much less straightforward and even more horrifying task than defeating the Nemean lion. It called for exceptional strength as well as quick decision-making and the ability to withstand the supernatural and, surprisingly, needed the support of another person as well. Despite his visceral fear of Hercules' prowess being confirmed by the scale and strength of the Nemean lion, the trembling king passed a raw and envious command down to Hercules to journey to the remote, plague-ridden Lerna, slay the Hydra that reigned at the edge of Argos and eradicate its poisonous seed from the land. The Hydra was a beast born of two beings who lived on the very edges of the world, Echidna and Typhon. Some claimed that Hera deliberately created this being so that it might bring evil and destruction wherever it went. It towered over all it encountered, but was its many jaws that instilled fear and uncertainty. Different legends present widely diverging figures, with some claiming only 5 heads, others suggesting 7, the most popular belief fixing the number at 9, although the possibility of a beast with 50 or 100 writhing, dripping fang necks was also whispered. That was only the beginning of the nightmare. This beast was capable of shocking self-restoration. Each severed or crushed head was immediately replaced by 2 or sometimes 3, even more dangerous and furious heads. Our adversary posed a threat that kept growing exponentially. The creature's horror was complete. At its core was a head that could never be killed no matter how many times its body was severed. Its very scent could kill a man or beast or leave behind poisonous fumes. The creature's odor or the slime left by its footsteps could also bring death to creatures that went near and destructively spoil any vegetation. The swamps of Lerna were a hellish abode, avoided by all sensible living things. Hercules knew that this enemy was without equal in the challenges he had encountered. The approach that had vanquished the Nemean lion would actually prove to be ineffective against the Hydra. It would simply empower the monster. He realized he couldn't tackle this alone. Iolaus was the brave young man Hercules counted on for this perilous task. His father was Iphicles, twin brother to Hercules. He proved himself a fearless warrior, an expert charioteer, and a young man who could think swiftly and always stood by Hercules. He desired to help Hercules on his hard journey to redemption, which may have inspired his deeds. Hercules and Iolaus united in a chariot of war, possibly furnished by wise Athena, whose affection for Hercules fueled her vigilance. Hercules and Iolaus ventured forth from Tiryns towards the murky and marshy region of Lerna. The air became stagnant and thick as they neared the haunt of the Hydra. The surrounding area consisted only of murky ponds, foul-smelling sludge and tall, foliated plants that gave off an unpleasant odor. The still air now reverberated with the humming of insects and the harsh calls of hidden frogs. According to the legends, the Hydra made its abode near a sacred grove of plane trees just beside the springs of Amymone. Hercules decided to drive the Hydra from its lair by using the power of fire. He told Iolaus to stay clear while he lit arrows with pitch and aimed them against the gloomy opening of the cave. The intense heat and smoke, along with the disruption caused by the flaming arrows, roused the Hydra from its lair. An unearthly noise unlike anything Hercules had heard before caused the Hydra to burst forth in all its nightmarish apparition. Its body, covered in dark scales and wet with filth and muck, undulated in powerful whirls that seemingly kept the thrashing cords of many necks in place. Each crest-shaped mouth on the 6 serpentine necks emitted a foul-scented vapor and emitted dart-like tongues that snapped with silvery malice. The poisonous aura of the creature made its way to Hercules, who may have protected himself by either plugging his nostrils or muffling his face with a section of the lion's mane. Hercules charged the Hydra head-on, the club or a harp, flying beside his body. Hercules set out to strike down the creature's heads with ruthless force and strength. Unfortunately, myths quickly became a reality. For every head he cut off, nauseating, venom-dripping ichor scribbling out in raw, oozing plumes, 2 or even 3 new heads would spring up within moments, snarling and clacking furiously. Things quickly turned nasty and difficult to manage for Hercules. The more heads that Hercules lopped off, the more determined and dangerous the Hydra became. I found myself battling a rising mass of poisonous rage that never let up. He was under siege from every side by a wood of teeth and toxic clouds. Hera felt such joy in her stepson's misery that she sent her personal assistant, the great Cancer, to join the battle against him. A mighty ally emerged from the depths of the waters to help the Hydra in its battle, completely catching Hercules off guard. A gigantic crab of titanic proportions and called Cancer appeared. This enormous crab crawled from the murky depths of the swamp, flashing its spotted carapace as it advanced on Hercules while waving its monstrous claws threateningly. Cancer made its way towards Hercules and started biting and pinching at his vulnerable limbs in an attempt to make him lose focus, trip or fall while battling the serpent. Vexed by the sudden danger rising up beneath him and frustrated by how events had unfolded, Hercules briefly focused his energies elsewhere. Swinging his mighty leg, Hercules crashed his heel into the giant crab, obliterating its carapace with a sickening snap. Hera honored the crab's inconsequential role in the fight by forever associating it with the night sky as the constellation Cancer. However, the Hydra continued to multiply in spite of his battles. The sheer magnitude of the task confronting Hercules coupled with the makeshift medicine and fatigue started to wear him down. All his efforts seemed to only fuel the Hydra, making it even more relentless in its assaults. Just when Hercules was on the verge of defeat, Iolaus thought up the vital idea that would save the day. I spotted that the regrown heads burst forth from fresh cuts. Maybe we could prevent the new heads from growing if we could quickly seal the places from which they emerged. "Uncle," he called out above the clamor of war, "light a fire. You've to beat the flames onto the stumps before each blow." Hercules, gasping for air and soaked from both sweat and swamp water, saw why the plan might just work. He roared his approval. Either way, Iolaus or Hercules gathered a supply of dry kindling. He used one of the fires burning in the area or made a torch from the flames of Hercules' arrows. A new, coordinated strategy began. Hercules struck with fury at any hissing head, smashing it against the ground with his club or sword. The naked stump would be immediately singed by the twin blaze of Iolaus' torch. Loud sizzles and revulsive sputtering swept through the air, accompanied by an unpleasant smell as if burning flesh and destroyed poison. The flames singed and sealed the gap, scorching the damaged tissue and thereby stopping the feared regrowth. They removed each head step by deadly step, the pair operating with relentless and well-choreographed brutality. He slashed with his club while Iolaus burned the wound. The dying Hydra lashed with agony, drooling venom from its few remaining snarling mouths. The battle was now going their way. Only one head was left, the immortal head. It stood apart from the rest, somehow larger, devilishly strong, or infinitely evil. Hercules understood that cutting it off wouldn't end its life. He lopped it off by delivering a forceful strike. The severed head dropped on the ground, contorting in rage and venom. Hercules understood that he must find a way to keep the immortal head from causing harm ever again. Hercules dug a deep hole off the path leading from Lerna toward Ilias. Afterwards he rolled the living, twisting, eternal head into the pit and, picking up every ounce of his remaining strength, pushed a huge boulder above it, trapping and sealing it forever in the earth. With the giant, lifeless Hydra sprawled before him, Hercules had managed to end its terrorizing reign. Then Hercules went about a task that would set the course for his future. He was aware that the monster's venom could prove fatal. He selected some arrows, drew close to the dead Hydra and plunging his hunting tools into its still wet carcass. He took care to smear the feathery tips of his arrows with both its venomous blood and its powerful poison. From this day on, anyone wounded by these arrows would instantly die and couldn't be healed. This action, though carried out for a survival purpose in his harsh environment, would eventually bring about the tragic end of Hercules himself. Hercules and Iolaus trudged back to Mycenae weary from battle and caked with the remnants of victory against the Hydra. He went before Eurystheus and recounted what had happened in their absence. He hoped to hear at least Eurystheus recognize his difficult task and finishing it. Yet, Eurystheus was intent on discounting all the labors of Hercules and was probably acting under the guidance of Hera, deciding that the Hydra slaying wouldn't qualify as an achievement to be acknowledged. Eurystheus claimed that Hercules couldn't be credited solely for bringing down the Hydra. He couldn't have overcome this foe without the help of his nephew Iolaus, who shared the burden by burning off the remaining heads. Eurystheus claimed that Hercules had failed to meet the strictly solo nature of the labors. This setback left Hercules feeling terribly let down. He accomplished incredible feats, but his accomplishments were diminished to nothing by a mere technicality. Still, Hercules chose to submit to the decision with a calm and unshakable demeanor. It would take him many more labors to absolve his guilt, and he recognized that the selfishness of the king and the hatred of a goddess would present yet another challenges. Even though 2 labors had been completed, King Eurystheus only acknowledged one of them as being worthy enough. The fate of Heracles remained ever in the hands of Hera, ready to challenge him in ways he had never imagined. Despite having conquered the deadly monster in the Lerna swamps, more challenges still lurked ahead. The 3rd labor, capturing the swift hind across the hallowed grounds. The fact that Hercules' praiseworthy defeat of the Hydra was downplayed by the king's small-minded declaration may have left him discouraged and resentful. Her determination to fulfill his punishment was undeterred, and the machinations of Eurystheus and Hera fueled his resolve even more. Eurystheus, both afraid and delighted by his power to torment Hercules, decided to devise another ordeal. He might have chosen something inconceivably difficult this time, a chase that would surely place Hercules in opposition to one of the deities among the Olympians. The command was issued. It was Hercules' task to hunt down the Ceryneian hind and return it alive from the area of Ino in Arcadia safely to Mycenae. It was a deer unlike any other, not easily to be captured by a regular hunter. The Ceryneian hind was an otherworldly and highly fascinating creature, adorned with peerless grace and gifted with a supernatural speed. It was said to be larger than any other creature in the woods, yet its motions were lithe and graceful as that of a doe, agile enough so that its hooves appeared to skim the very ground itself. Distinctively, its antlers were made of gold and dazzled like rays of sunlight shining through the trees. The Ceryneian hind held a special place in the heart of Artemis, the Olympian goddess whose colors ranged from red to white, who ruled over the domains of hunting and the wilderness, aided women in childbirth, and upheld norms of chastity. Many different stories told of how the hind first appeared. Others believed this hind to be one of 5 such magnificent creatures that Artemis had once pursued. She caught 4 of them after chasing them around the world and pulled each of them in their turn to her gleaming carriage. This free hind remained unchained by any human hand and proudly displayed its natural speed. There were also stories making it a nymph turned into a hind or one of those sacred to Artemis. Artemis's fury towards anyone who inflicted damage upon the hind, especially by killing it, was so fierce that even Hercules, the son of Zeus, would do all he could to steer clear of such a punishment. The challenge, then, lay in securing this creature without harming it, requiring skills of stealth and skill rather than brute force. Hercules accepted the difficult task, fully aware of the complexity involved. He planted his feet on the roads of Arcadia, land of craggy hills and wooded slopes. Hercules was chasing a quadruped that took far more than ordinary investigation to find. The quest lasted no less than 12 months. His incredible perseverance and tireless endurance were demonstrated as he relentlessly pursued the elusive beast. The herd of golden-antlered hinds would elude him no matter how close he came. He would sometimes see its striking antlers glint against the sunlight as it vanished behind the horizon or vanished into a dark wood. It constantly eluded him, driving him to follow the animal all throughout Greece. The stories recount the hunt carrying Hercules across the whole of Greece, from Thessaly and Boeotia to lands beyond. Some of the oldest accounts proclaim his pursuit exceeded even the mythical Hyperboreans and ventured into the lands of the Hyperboreans, believed to be at the farthest edges of the world next to the renowned river Ister, the Danube. His skin tanned by the summer sun, he took in every glimmer of the full golden moon in the endless hunt. He folk toughed his way across snowy mountain passes during the bitter winter, sheltered by the lion pelt, and his steamy breath marked his path. The hero chased the sacred hind tirelessly for days, weeks, and even whole months. The hunter studied the hind's routine, where it stopped to feed and the routes it used to move through the evening wilderness. Undeterred by the pain in his body, the hero carried on with only his unwavering determination to drive him forward. Stubbornly and steadfastly, the god followed the hind without relenting. The hind continued to elude the hunter, its fleetness of foot allowing it to cross even the most rugged ground without so much as a stumble. Hunters and their prey mingled in a rhythmic show of skill and strength throughout the expansive wilds of ancient Greece. A year had just come to an end when the chase started to wear on the hind. The hind soon realized that it couldn't match the determination of Hercules forever. The hind, exhausted after running for so long, decided to find some rest. It returned to the land of Arcadia and might have sought refuge at the stream of Ladon or possibly on Mount Artemisium, which was dedicated to its goddess. At this moment, while the hind stopped to quench its thirst or was about to step across the river, Hercules sensed that his enemy was vulnerable. Iron, perhaps mythical events of the past, are described in various accounts. Some say he gradually guided it to nets spread in advance, so that it became entangled without harm. A more widespread story praises Hercules for his unmatched skill with the bow and arrow, figuring that destroying or severely injuring the sacred creature would be unthinkable. His arrow was pitched with unerring accuracy. He aimed at the hind legs rather than its vital organs or heart. The arrow found its mark, hitting the hind's legs with unerring precision. It either bound their joints tightly or caused a small wound that slowed its desperate flight without doing it any harm. His command and precision belied Hercules' strength alone. Another legend says that Hercules ran at its heels until it succumbed to exhaustion and he could safely lay hold of it. No matter how he did it, the golden-horned Ceryneian hind was now his. He secured its bronze legs with soft restraints so as not to injure or alarm the animal. He placed the magnificent, surprisingly hefty breaking neck hair upon his tremendous shoulders with the pelt of the Nemean lion beneath it. Proudly bearing his prize, he set out on the arduous trip back home. Carrying the living hind began to take its toll, and he made the return trip cautiously so as to cause no further injury to the creature. His decision to travel through a patch of Arcadian woodland put him face to face with Laocoon. Threatened with punishment, he hoped he could escape. Two magnificent figures suddenly emerged from out of the flora and fauna surrounding Hercules: the goddess Artemis and her brother. Artemis and her twin brother Apollo, who was also the god of archery, music, and light. Deep anger radiated on her face as she beheld the hind adorning the shoulders of a human. The sharp blade of her silver bow was drawn back and she held it steady, ready to release her anger and shoot the transgressor dead. The god Apollo stood before him no less awesomely, his form imbued with the power of immortality. "Halt, transgressor!" Artemis barked at him with the authority of an arrow about to be released from a taut bow. "What gall you exhibit by taking one of my sacred animals? You'll face the full punishment for your actions." Hercules, although a child of Zeus, understood well that crossing an inextinguishable rage such as Artemis's would lead to grave consequences. He gently set the golden-horned hind back down, paying attention to make its resting place as accommodating as possible. He remained upright, deferent rather than deferring. He told them precisely what had led him to this moment, revealing how an oracle's mandate made him King Eurystheus' servant, and how he contemplated fulfilling those arduous tasks to absolve himself of the crimes he had committed while under a frenzy. He made it clear that he had no choice but to obey King Eurystheus' order. He made it very clear that he was determined not to harm or put the animal's life in danger, and that his purpose was to deliver it unharmed to Eurystheus. Once he had fulfilled that duty, he planned to return the gentle creature to its native habitat. Artemis and Apollo listened intently. Artemis' face relaxed somewhat when she learned of his dilemma and understood that he was bound by destiny and the dictates of the oracle. It's possible her opinion of him improved because she saw he valued and treated the animal with great care. A new feeling of compassion started taking root in the goddess's heart, along with her acceptance of the unavoidable circumstances surrounding the mission. She lowered her bow. She acknowledged the truth of what the hero said. Fate entangles even us Olympians in its complex pattern. I'm impressed by the care you've shown my furious hind. Make sure the Ceryneian hind reaches the king in perfect condition once it's been seen by him. Be on your way and fulfill your mission as you set out. Bowing his head to the divine twins, Hercules fetched the sacred hind and carried it forward. No further challenges presented themselves as Hercules made the final leg of his journey to Mycenae. The king was dumbfounded by Hercules' triumph and quivering at the sight of the sacred animal. He may also have secretly wished that Hercules wouldn't succeed in capturing the hind or else suffer the violent consequences of offending Artemis. The presence of the bloodthirsty beast in the midst of his royal capital overwhelmed the king's senses. Eurystheus thought about using the living hind as part of his collection of exotic animals or as a source of pride. Nevertheless, Hercules refused to permit the king to acquire the hind. When he returned to King Eurystheus, Hercules gave the hind back to its wild home. Hercules fulfilled his promise and set the hind free. After his years of constant pursuit, Hercules finally released the Ceryneian hind. Then, in a moment of freedom, it raced off to the wilderness, nearest to the sacred groves of Arcadia where Artemis resided. As a result, the third labor was completed. It required Hercules to exhibit remarkable endurance and patience, as he went after the hind for an entire year. Hercules had shown he could use subtlety and tact as well as muscle when the situation demanded. Though Hercules had completed that task to the letter, Eurystheus was no doubt already planning a still greater challenge for the courageous warrior. The fourth labor, the hunt of the Erymanthian boar, suspicion, subterfuge, and sacrifice. Hercules knew instantly that he wouldn't escape his uncle's wicked attention for long. The king was as cruel and devious as ever and gleefully ordered Hercules not just to confront but also capture the Erymanthian boar alive. Hercules was instructed to near the town of Erymanthia was said to ravage with great ferocity. The Erymanthian boar. This animal was unlike any feral pig known to humankind. The Erymanthian boar was a fearsome beast with a shaggy coat, small but glowering eyes, and a temper so violent it tinged its gaze with fiery anger. Its greatest threats were its towering tusks that could impale and kill an opponent in a single moment. The boar inhabited the forested mountainsides of Mount Erymanthus in northwestern Arcadia, located close to the land of Psophis. From the safety of its mountain cave, the menacing boar would plow through the fields and orchards below, bringing devastation wherever it went. It ravaged fields, destroyed gardens, attacked animals, and spread fear into the souls of nearby Greeks, leaving them helpless against the beast. Never faltering in his purpose, Hercules once again made preparations to return to Arcadia. He made his way towards the territory of Pholo, where centaurs, gentle creatures part human, yet still partly equine, lived in the surrounding wilderness. Some centaurs were known for their strict discipline, while others were reckless and given to brawling. One exception was Chiron, who was recognized for his wisdom and had instructed several legendary figures on the ways of warfare. One day, while Hercules was traversing Mount Pholo, he came upon a remarkable centaur named Pholus and asked for shelter. Pholus stood out among the centaurs for his kind and decent ways. His parents were Silenus and a nymph of the island of Melos. As such, he led a peaceful and secluded life in his cave. Pholus showed Hercules the utmost courtesy and led him into his humble mountain cave. Pholus served Hercules some heartily cooked meat while he happily ate his own portion uncooked. During the meal, Hercules, thirsty from his travels, inquired about having some wine. A look of concern briefly crossed Pholus's usually peaceful countenance. Pholus told Hercules that there was just one jar of wine in his cave. This was no ordinary vintage. The wine had been presented personally by Dionysus, the god of wine, and it was considered sacred by the centaurs of Mount Pholo. Dionysus had given them this wine to share with the understanding that they should save it until its moment arrived or only share it with the proper guest. Pholus set great importance on the fact that the wine was jointly owned and was afraid of opening it without all of them agreeing to do so. Hercules was famed for his immense thirst and his incredible strength. He convinced Pholus by either assuring him there was nothing terrible about the contents or by showing his deep thirst for refreshment. His fierce willingness to honor his guest combined with a subtle nervousness caused Pholus to have no means to decline. Reluctantly, Pholus slid the stone cover from the opening of the antique wine container. As soon as the lid was removed, the most aromatic and powerful wafts of wine shot the air. This liquid was nothing that ordinary men could obtain. Its divine scent was so intense that it spread through the air far and wide, gathering the animal senses and reaching every neighboring centaur. These were the more tumultuous members of Pholus's family, who were known as Nessus, Eurytion, and others. They often clashed and tenaciously guarded their love of Dionysus's divine wine. A whiff of their wine interrupted by an outsider ignited an immediate crisis. A sudden wave of violence descended upon Pholus's sanctuary. Enraged and aroused by what they smelled, the other centaurs stormed the cave in full fury. They used only the most basic tools of their brutishness as weapons. Still others seized immense boulders and huge logs dragged from the forest ground by their immense strength and used them as gigantic clubs and missiles in combat. Their gaze was filled with rage, and their hooves left a thunderous cover ringing across the woodland. The most violent of the centaurs, Anchius or Agrius, seemed to be spearheading the attack. Intense fighting broke out when Hercules' enemies swarmed around their cave. Enraged by the sudden assault and compelled to protect both his host and himself, Hercules launched into battle. Hercules first grabbed blazing embers and flames from Pholus's hearth to repel those centaurs closest to them. The flames from these burning branches and logs sent the horses of the centaurs whinnying and retreating. Yet the centaurs were many and full of rage. Hercules had to rely on his most effective tools against the centaurs. The poisoned arrows that Hercules used were dipped in the life-lessening venom of the Lernaean hydra. He drew an arrow from his quiver, placed it on the string of his bow, and released the arrow. The arrow poisoned with the deadly poison from the hydra pierced the chest of one of the foremost centaurs. It emitted a terrible cry, part human, part horse, then crumpled to the ground, its muscles spasming from the rapid spread of the hydra poison in its blood. The other centaurs caught a glimpse of the devastation caused by Hercules' arrows and briefly stopped to consider their next move. Yet their drunken anger and forces combined made them all the more determined to push forward. Each arrow released by Hercules took its mark mercilessly, and his relentless aim decimated the enemies before him. Centaur after centaur crumpled under Hercules' arrows, their assault disintegrating into chaos and panic. Hercules hunted the centaurs until they fled completely from Pholus's domain, never missing his mark along the way. While protecting himself was usually the outcome Hercules strived for, grief and sorrow often trailed in his wake as well. Fearing for their lives, some of the retreating centaurs flocked to the one sanctuary they knew might offer them safety. Chiron's cave was where he made his abode at the foot of Mount Pelion. Even if some stories described him closer to the centaur's original home in Thessaly, or say the wounded centaurs went far to seek shelter. Chiron was known to be an expert in medicine, music, and archery, and had guided the likes of Jason, Achilles, and possibly even a young Hercules. Hercules released an arrow as he was chasing the swift centaur Elatus. The arrow either flew past Elatus's fleeing body or completely missed Chiron's speedy shape. His arrow hit Chiron, driving in deeply at the knee or thigh. The wound was extremely painful, even if a normal mortal could easily recover from it. Chiron, being invincible as a divinely born child of Cronus and Philyra, meant that he would never pass away. He was fated to endure pain and suffering for all time, thanks to the venom of the Hydra. He was deeply saddened and full of regret when he learned he had caused harm to the figure he had once regarded as both a mentor and a dear friend. He used his sacrifice to atone for what had happened, so that he might bring relief to Prometheus, who was equally immortal and deprived. Chiron offered his own immortal soul. Another terrible event occurred even as Hercules faced the opposing army on the hill. Pholus eventually stepped out of his cave after Hercules had dealt with the defeated centaurs and helped those who had been injured. Pholus gazed with morbid interest at the corpses of his dying friends, astonished by the astonishing lethality of Hercules' arrows. He marveled at how a tiny arrow could slay giants that were so big and strong. He gently extracted an arrow from the remains of a fallen centaur to have a better look at it. While carrying the arrow, either accidentally or by pure misfortune, it slipped from his hands and went straight into his foot. On some occasions, as he was extracting the arrow, it lodged itself in his foot. Pholus, unlike Chiron, had a level of immortality that could be overcome by extreme circumstances. The poison of the Hydra spread rapidly through his body, causing his death. On his return to the cave, Hercules was shocked to see his host lying dead. Pholus perished due to a simple act of trying to protect his guest. Hercules felt immense grief, as it was this friendly centaur who met an untimely death through nothing more than his desire to help the hero. Out of respect for his fallen companion, Hercules laid Pholus to rest on the summit of the mountain that was finally known as Mount Pholo. This whole diversion, marked by violence and unfortunate events, was known as the Paragon, a side adventure that usually carried great literary and symbolic weight. His spirit was now heavy, yet the god wouldn't relent until Hercules had conquered the beast roaming the forest. The Erymanthian boar remained one of the king's biggest challenges. Disheartened by failure and loss, Hercules set off once more in search of the unyielding boar. Hercules likely consulted the inhabitants of Psophis, who were familiar with the area, or had already received advice from his mentor Chiron to properly track down and trap the wild boar without doing it harm. The counsel given was to employ the characteristics of both the boar and the mountain terrain in carrying out this task. Heracles needed to lure the boar out of its thick forest in the basin of Mount Erymathus and guide it to higher ground where wintry snows made the boar's progress more difficult. Accordingly, Hercules climbed Mount Erymanthus until his approach became close enough to the region where the boar was known to frequent. From that point on, Hercules vigorously stirred up as much of a racket as possible with his spear and shield to draw the boar out of the forest. The boar appeared from the shadows, as its lair was deeply and larger than the habitat of other boars where it lived in. It appeared as a formidable enemy, breathing fiercely and baring its sharp tusks in frothing rage. Charged. Hercules sidestepped and dashed aside as the boar repeatedly charged at him with its sharp tusks. He refused to face it in an attempt to outmuscle it on its chosen ground. Then, he set out to chase it unceasingly, skillfully directing its movement to lead it towards the topmost areas of the mountain where the ground was covered with deep snow. The animal couldn't effectively maneuver in the thick accumulation of snow. As its legs sank deeper and deeper into the drifts, the boar started tiring, its every step more labored. The mountainside snow slowed the boar down considerably, slowly wearing it out. Hercules followed the boar without rest for as long as it had the stamina, probably for several days, across the freezing elevation. The beast eventually became stranded in an especially deep snowdrift or a ravine crammed with drifts of snow, raging and struggling fiercely yet largely incapable of moving. At that moment, Hercules seized the chance and sprang onto the backs of the boar, using all his remaining strength. It was a risky move because the rageful animal was still fighting and snapping at anything nearby. However, Hercules was far stronger and much faster than the boar. He evaded its attacks and twisted its legs tightly with cords or heavy chains he had prepared himself. He reportedly wore it down and held it fast before making it fast. Herculean hero bent all his might to catch the savage Erymanthian boar, the legendary lord of the forest feared by all. Ensuing was the challenge of carrying the huge boar alive to Mycenae without its anger and strength causing Hercules any trouble along the journey. Firmly gripping the noisy, desperate, and dusty beast with his portentously muscular shoulders, Hercules set out on the potentially hilarious, yet decidedly hard expedition from the Arcadian mountains to the royal court in Mycenae. Truly heavy was the boar, and its resistance only made the process all the more difficult. Hercules staggered into Mycenae with the Erymanthian boar, having sweat, grime, and boar spittle all over him. Everyone knew that he had returned victorious. When King Eurystheus learned that the ferocious, long-tusked boar was standing right before him, he naturally succumbed to unbridled terror. The king made no attempt to receive Hercules in a polite manner. The myth says that he screamed and quickly scrambled down into the giant Pythos jar, which only narrowly accepted his curled-up figure. His voice, unable to be fully heard, pleaded with Hercules to remove the appalling beast but to put a quick end to it, too. Hercules must have found his relatives' cowardly actions quite entertaining. Some versions of the myth don't agree on exactly what happened to the Erymanthian boar. Rumor has it that Hercules did nothing more elaborate than releasing it within city limits, and the boar met its end either by natural causes or by escaping from there. Some accounts claim that the great beast was slain and devoured after the victory, or else briefly staged in an impromptu royal zoo before being eliminated. Thus, with the fourth labor accomplished, he continued the journey. This labor had displayed Hercules' power, tenacity, skill in employing the environment around him, and the ways in which tragic events occurred in the wake of his heroism. Seeing that Eurystheus was confined in a jar was a moment of dark amusement, yet there were still 8 greater tasks waiting on the horizon for him to meet. Each labyrinthine trial pushed him deeper into the pages of legend, bringing to the fore every aspect of his legendary nature. The fifth labor, the Augean stables. This particular task appeared to be not so much difficult as it was plainly distasteful and greatly daunting. Clearing the stables and cattle yards of King Augeas in only one day. Augeas, son of Helios, king of the area we now call Elis, operated the largest herds of extraordinary cattle in all of Greece. He was believed to maintain the largest herds in all of Greece, many times more than other farmers possessed. As the king bred an enormous number of cattle, so the land was soon overfilled with their waste. The stables where his cattle were kept had gone uncleaned for so long, maybe decades, according to some sources. Piles of rotting dung had grown so massive that it was both a disgusting monolith to look at and the cause of disease and decay for the area, as dung festered on the fields. Eurystheus probably picked this task at Hera's suggestion in order to embarrass Hercules. Could there possibly be any honor associated with this job? There was no match for such a daunting job in the short span of a single day for any mortal. Heracles may well have suspected the Nemean king wanted him to decline the work, fail to succeed, or struggle so greatly that his reputation and glory would suffer as a result. Hercules faced the challenge with his typical formidable strength of will and perhaps a bit of strategic thinking. Then he journeyed to Elis and met directly with King Augeas. Hercules proposed to clean the entire stable in a single day as he didn't want payment to be refused due to being asked by Eurystheus, or simply to see whether he could achieve anything from completing this labor himself. As payment for doing this seemingly impossible task, Hercules asked for 1/10 of Augeas's livestock, 1/10 of Augeas's cattle. Despite his doubts about the fulfillment, the king was glad to accept Hercules' proposal and made an oath, or had his son swear to uphold it. The king very likely assumed Hercules spoke idly and wouldn't follow through. Hercules quickly realized that using sheer muscle power to clean out the stables would be both laborious and soon grow impossible, so he turned his attention to the surrounding area. He noted that 2 rivers, the Alpheus and the Punius or Menius, both ran close to the stables. The plan that he devised showed great courage and ingenuity. He ripped a huge gaping hole in the wall surrounding the yard where the cattle were held. He proceeded to the rivers and channeled their water to penetrate the stables and the stable courtyard even more thoroughly. The torrential flow of water, powered by the huge volume of accumulated filth, washed away years and possibly even decades worth of excrement in one great cleansing current. The rivers served as a gigantic scrubbing tool, removing all filth and dirt from every corner and leaving the ground completely fresh. That same day, when the sun was about to retreat, the foul-smelling Augean stables were transformed into perfectly clean and fresh-smelling structures. Hercules then restored the rivers to where they'd been before and fixed the breach in the wall. Nevertheless, Augeas broke his promise to Hercules. After finding out that Hercules had fulfilled the task under commission by Eurystheus, Augeas reneged on paying the agreed-upon fee. He claimed that Hercules was already promised to do the work by someone else, so no payment was owed. Others claim that he completely ignored the fact that he had promised anything. Hercules was outraged by how Augeas had reneged on his promise. Phyleus boldly spoke out to prove that the deal made between his father and Hercules was genuine. Augeas was incensed that his son stood up for the truth and punished him by sending him into exile. At present, there was nothing Hercules could do except to continue fulfilling his responsibilities to Eurystheus. In the end, Hercules swore to take his revenge on Augeas, a promise that would prove to be costly for the royal family of Elis. The king refused to acknowledge this task as one of Hercules' labor exploits. His reasons were twofold, yet others claim that Hercules couldn't be accredited for this task because others carried out the labor and possibly because he undertook it in exchange for money. Still, Eurystheus refused to recognize any progress made in that labor and continued to hold Hercules to strict limits. 2 labors had been cancelled, leaving room for Hercules to complete more in the future. The 5th labor tested Hercules' cunning and construction abilities equally as much as his physical strength. He was made aware of the treachery consistently shown by the very people he tried to help. The 6th labor, the Stymphalian birds. Hercules faced another type of dangerous creature when he was tasked with extracting the Stymphalian birds from the forests around Lake Stymphalus. Gangs of ferocious birds were wandering through the thick swamps near Lake Stymphalus in the region of Arcadia. Several myths explained how the Stymphalian birds came into being. They were believed to belong to Ares or be children of Stymphalus and his wife, Ornis. He was claimed to be larger than any other bird, with iron-hard talons and metal wings that gave off glints of bright gold. They hunted, attacked, and even ate people and animals with their deadly metallic weapons. They also had the strange ability to fire their metallic feathers like arrows, and their laden droppings infected the land and crops, spoiling and poisoning them both. It was reported that they'd come to these woods either because of the wolf packs that hunted them or to escape from different danger, and now they'd increased greatly and infested the entire region. The most challenging part of fighting the Stymphalian birds was the environment in which they lived. The marshland surrounding Lake Stymphalus was dangerous to navigate. A man couldn't walk on it, and it was also too shallow to cross by boat. Hercules was unable to approach the Stymphalian birds safely due to their strength and the vast multitude of them. Athena appeared by the lake shore to help Hercules find a way to solve his challenge. Some accounts say that the solution was provided by Hephaestus at the behest of Athena. She, or Hephaestus, bestowed upon Hercules a pair of crotala, instruments made of solid bronze or brass. These tools were unlike any other ordinary musical instruments used at the time. They were designed by the gods to emit an ear-shattering and disruptive clamor when hit against each other. Athena told Hercules to find a high vantage point, preferably a hill or an elevated outcropping, that would command a clear view of the swamp and the birds in their hiding place. He was then to strike the clappers to produce even louder and more frightening sound. Hercules obeyed Athena and performed the task assigned to him. With great force, Hercules struck the clappers until a clamorous and terrifying din resounded in every direction. The birds swiftly emerged from their hiding places and soared up into the air, flying in disarray from the terrifying new sound. Confused and in a state of disorder, they flew around the swamp area, their minds disturbed by the extreme and irritating clatter. The birds, in flight and distressed, no longer had places to hide. Hercules seized his opportunity. He aimed straight at the creatures with his arrows embedded with venom from the Hydra. The frightful birds plummeted down in rapid succession as they were struck by his arrows. He only had to wipe out a few to disperse and drive away the entire flock. He wanted to force the birds to abandon their territories around Stymphalus and Arcadia. Many were slain, and the rest, frightened beyond measure, fled to safety and were never seen again in Stymphalus. Still, others claim that this current version of the Stymphalian birds dwelt in the region around Orishas or Dia, in the Black Sea, and were ultimately vanquished by Jason and his companions. Having rid Arcadia of the Stymphalian birds, Hercules reported to Eurystheus. As there was no one with him for this route to Lake Stymphalus and the task was completed almost entirely on his own initiative, the king couldn't but admit that it had been completed. The sixth labor was the midway moment of Hercules' initial 12 tasks. He had overcome animals, monstrous foes, and unbearable gore, employing physical might, stamina, sharp thought, and divine power. Every labor he completed contributed to spreading his renown, which was built on backbreaking labor and driven ever forward by the animosity of a vengeful goddess and the pettiness of an evil monarch. His path of atonement still had many miles to go. Many more challenges were to come, every one of them intended to push him past his breaking point. The following tasks would lead him even beyond what was then known as the borders of the world, revealing yet more sides of his heroism. The seventh labor, the Cretan bull. Hermes instructed Hercules to travel to Crete and vanquish a fearsome bull that belonged to the strong King Minos. He had to find and safely return the bull of Crete to Mycenae. This was no ordinary bull. There is controversy regarding exactly how and why it came to be as it was. Another interpretation is that Minos had betrayed Poseidon by sparing this particular bull from sacrifice. As a result of Minos's sham sacrifice, Poseidon turned the bull exceedingly wild or drove his wife Pasiphae to dedicate herself to it. The Minotaur was then conceived from their union, but it was frequently attributed to another similarly divine bull. A different explanation is that the same bull transported Europa to Crete when she struck up an affair with Zeus. Despite how its origins may be told in different ways, the Cretan bull stood out as an awe-inspiring yet terrifying beast. White like the waves of the sea, its strength was boundless and it brought destruction to the land and panic to its people. The king readily agreed to hire someone to capture the Cretan bull. Hercules set out for Crete and approached the king. Seeing the opportunity to get rid of the devastation wrought by the creature, King Minos granted Hercules permission to hunt down the bull and offered whatever resources his young visitor required. Hercules, sure he could handle it on his own, rejected the king's offer of assistance. Finding the bull was easy because of the devastation it had caused. The task before Hercules was to bring the bull to submissive and unharmed. Hercules faced the bull in the countryside of Crete. The bull faced Hercules with every muscle tense, its bellowing breath suggestive of fiery breath, police. Drawing on the skill and strength developed during his journeys, Hercules confronted the bull. He avoided its horns and, overcoming its strong resistance, finally brought the bull to the ground with his great strength. There are many ways the actual encounter has been described. Reports differ, some claiming he brought it under control with brute force alone, while others suggest he held it by the legs after tiring it out. Of course, what everyone agrees upon is that he managed to overpower it using only his great physical prowess and cunning, keeping the bull from serious harm in the process. The hero now had to bring the bull back to the Greek mainland after having subdued it. Some sources claim he mounted the bull and rode it right across the sea, just as Europa had been carried away on one. It's also believed that he guided the bull aboard his ship. Arriving in Mycenae, he put the tamed Cretan bull before Eurystheus. The king remained just as fearful as he had been with previous labors. He was completely at a loss as to how he should deal with the bull. Some people believed the king intended to offer it to Hera, but Hera herself probably would have rejected having any connection to a creature that belonged to her foe. The bull was released from its captivity. It freely roamed the Peloponnese, wreaking havoc, until it arrived in Marathon, among the lands of Attica. Beginning life as the Cretan bull, it eventually ended as the Marathonian bull before being sacrificed by Theseus during his heroic deed in the myth of the Cretan bull. He finally finished his seventh task. He brought back the bull just as instructed by Eurystheus. Having carried out this task in lands outside the Peloponnese, Hercules' adventures were now reaching farther afield. The eighth labor, the Mares of Diomedes. The eighth labor was even more cruel and horrible than any before it, requiring Hercules to confront and capture man-eating horses. Eurystheus ordered Hercules to journey north to Thrace and take possession of the infamous horses of Diomedes, the king of the Bistones, then bring them to Mycenae. Diomedes ruled over the fierce Bistones people living in Thrace. He was born to Ares, the god of war, and Cyrene. Diomedes' mares were unlike any other horses due to their unique colors, naming, and ferocious nature. They were ferocious, unbreakable beasts who lived on a diet of human blood. Diomedes imprisoned the horses with iron chains and fed them the flesh of hapless travelers, shipwrecked sailors, or of those whom he had vanquished in battle. Some tell a story that their breath exhaled flames. Realizing the possible risks, Hercules arrived in Thrace by sea. Hercules was accompanied by a group of helpers this time. Hercules gathered a group of comrades who were willing to go with him to face the dangers that awaited them in Diomedes' realm. One of those companions was a young man called Abderus, who was very close to Hercules and may have been one of his young lovers. Hercules and his companions marched to the stables of King Diomedes once they set foot in the land of the Bistones. Hercules and his men subdued the stable staff and released the fearsome horses from their cages. Hercules now had to confront the king of the Bistones face to face. Hercules fought valiantly and eventually emerged victorious in his duel with Diomedes. As the climax of the story, Hercules gave the evil king to the horses to settle their appetite, or perhaps as an appropriate punishment for their cruel master. Surprisingly, the horses seemed less wild and dangerous after eating Diomedes, as though their insatiable hunger for human beings had been quelled or no longer controlled them. Once the horses were considered less threatening, Hercules and his men decided to lead them to the coast to bring them back to Mycenae. Meanwhile, the warriors of Diomedes launched a surprise attack and tried to stop Hercules as he led the mares toward the shore. Leaving the tamed horses with Abderus, Hercules faced the Thracians in the ensuing battle. Hercules easily defeated the Bistones with his considerable strength and skill. Meanwhile, as Hercules battled the Thracians, a terrible calamity befall the group. Whatever the explanation, the mares regressed into their brutal and unruly state, outmatching Abderus in every way. They attacked the youth, hauling him down, and then ripped his limbs from his body, consuming him. Returning from the battle triumphant, Hercules found the devastating scene before him. Devastated by the death of Abderus, Hercules created a city near the boy's burial site and called it Abdera in his memory. Hercules finished the task despite the sadness that filled him. Having suffered a great loss, Hercules somehow managed to round up the mares and travel back to Greece with them aboard ship. He presented them to Eurystheus. Eurystheus seemed continually confused as to what to do with the animals. He gave the mares in sacrifice to Hera. Others believe Eurystheus sent them to Mount Olympus, where fierce creatures eventually hunted them down. Some tell the story of how Eurystheus demanded the mares be placed in a chariot, or that their offspring fought at Troy during the Trojan War. The eighth labor was both painful and full of sadness for Hercules, who was all too aware of the mortal risks he faced whenever he undertook a task ordained by Eurystheus. The cost of catching the man-eating horses was the death of his nephew Abderus. The ninth labor, the girdle of Hippolyta. Hercules was sent to the remote realm of the Amazon women to obtain for Eurystheus the girdle that adorned their queen, Hippolyta. The queen, Admete, Hera's daughter and Eurystheus' granddaughter, had desired it. She wanted to possess an object that marked the authority and prestige of Hippolyta, the legendary Amazonian queen. The story held that Hippolyta received the girdle from her godly father, Ares, conferring great honor upon it. Hercules assembled a new group of companions, such as Theseus and Telamon, and then made the journey to Themyscira, which lay on the Black Sea near the Thermodon River. When Hercules and his companions landed on the shores of Themyscira, the Amazons first met them with no open animosity. As soon as she laid eyes upon him, Hippolyta decided to approach Hercules and welcome him on board. Hippolyta readily agreed after hearing his request to take the girdle as a gift for Admete, his wife. Hippolyta was impressed by Hercules' bravery and felt that giving him the girdle wouldn't be worth an conflict. The Amazons and Hercules appeared to come to an agreement amicably. Yet Hera wasn't willing to allow Hercules to fulfill his task so effortlessly. Assuming the guise of an Amazon, Hera secretly planted a false story within the minds of other members of the tribe. She told the others that Hercules and his men intended to kidnap their queen or other lead Amazons in order to enslave or marry them. Such provocations abounded among the Amazons, as they readily reacted to the allegation. Fearing for their queen's safety, the Amazons quickly prepared their weapons and descended on Hercules and his party. Suddenly ambushed and suspecting Hippolyta had betrayed him or secretly instructed the attack, Hercules had no choice but to fight back. The fighting broke out on the edge of the sea. Although the Amazons were formidable fighters, they were outnumbered by Hercules and his powerful allies. Hippolyta was killed during the confusion of the battle. The versions of her death differ greatly. Others claim he thought she had orchestrated the attack and so slew her instantly, taking the belt from her mortal remains. It's recounted that she was slain either by an Amazon or by a Greek warrior. In some of the more dramatic or heartbreaking stories, Hippolyta was in love with Hercules or Theseus, and either willingly handed him the girdle just as the fighting started or died amid the carnage and conflict. Returning victorious and in possession of the girdle, Hercules led his men to ships and set out for Greece. While on this journey, many dramatic or important incidents took place. Tales have also arisen about Theseus taking Antiope, also thought to be Hippolyta, as his Amazon wife, which sparked an Amazon invasion against Attica in the future. Upon his return, Hercules handed the girdle of Hippolyta to Eurystheus, who subsequently gave it to his daughter Admete. The ninth labor was successfully fulfilled, yet it became a violent undertaking marked by error and suspicions stirred by the gods. At this point, 2 tasks had already been thrown out due to outside influences, so Hercules would soon be faced with 3 last, extremely difficult tasks. Thus, 3 more labors remained. The 10th labor, the cattle of Geryon. Eurystheus ordered Hercules to travel to the most distant lands on the edge of the world, to the Isle of Erythea far to the west, beyond the vast okeanos that surrounded the globe. Hercules was to steal the bright red cows of Geryon and carry them back to Mycenae. Geryon was a terrifying figure who had 3 bodies or heads and 6 arms and legs all attached to a single pair of legs. Chrysaor was his father and father to all of Geryon's brothers, while Callirrhoe, Oceanus' daughter, became his mother. Not only did Geryon watch over the cattle, but a powerful Greeks thought he was Greek, emerged from each wound. Getting to Erythea required an incredible and exciting feat. He went to both Europe and Libya in Africa. He was so irritated by the intense sun in Libya that he vowed to fire at Helios himself. Helios mirthfully granted Hercules the use of his golden chariot to speed his way across the okeanos to reach Erythea. Hercules honored his journey west by building 2 large pillars on opposite sides of the place where the Mediterranean joined the Atlantic, frequently linked to the Rock of Gibraltar and Jebel Musa in Morocco or Monte Hacho in Ceuta. They represented the most far-flung point of the earth known to the Greek scholars of his time. On setting foot on Erythea, Hercules found himself facing the 2-headed dog Orthrus, because he had used Helios's golden cup to locate its location. Bearing down on him with furious howls, the dog met its death from a single devastating blow of the herald's club, which could be a new weapon or the skin of the Nemean lion that, in some versions, was hurled like the weapon itself. After that, Eurytion hastened to the defense of his dog, but he was also slain by Hercules. Geryon heard about the commotion. He put on 3 sets of armor, gripped 3 javelins, and marched forward to do battle with Hercules. A tremendous battle ensued. Geryon came at Hercules from 3 angles simultaneously, a powerful foe from every direction. However, armed with resourcefulness and exceptional strength, and possibly the help of arrows dipped in Hydra's venom, Hercules stood his ground. He directed an arrow so powerfully that it pierced all 3 of Geryon's bodies, or he destroyed Geryon completely by killing each of his bodies separately. Geryon became Hercules' defeated rival, and the entire herd of cattle became his to capture. Returning the cattle back to Mycenae was a new and even more demanding feat that required Hercules to overcome many obstacles along the way. Hercules loaded the cattle into a boat made from a golden bowl owned by the sun god Helios and set sail across the sea to reach Tartessos in Iberia, now Spain. Afterwards, he led the cattle on foot across the mountains and land until he safely returned to Greece. The journey home was marked by many perurga, or detours. While Hercules made his way through Liguria, modern-day northwest Italy, two brothers named Alybion and Ursinus, sons of Poseidon, attempted to take the cattle from him. Hercules fought and killed them. Yet, in the heat of the battle, Hercules found that he was running low on arrows. He called upon Zeus, who answered by burning him with hot stones that Hercules flung to finish off the enemy. The place of this encounter came to be known as the Crow in Provence, said to have arisen from the miracle that brought down the stones from the sky. When Hercules reached the future location of Rome, one of his prize cattle was taken by a fire-breathing giant named Cacus, a son of Hephaestus. Cacus cunningly maneuvered the cattle into his cave on the Aventine Hill. This way, anyone looking for them would only find traces leading back to his den. Eventually, as hope of finding the stolen cattle seemed lost, Hercules heard them making a noise from within the cave. Hercules burst open the entrance to the cave with all of his might and killed Cacus in hand-to-hand combat when the flame-throwing monster emerged. The rescue of the cattle gave rise to a myth associated with the Era Maxima, an important shrine dedicated to Hercules. He drove his cattle across Scythia when a raging storm drove him to take refuge and rest in a cave. Meanwhile, his horses that pulled the chariot left his side while he slept deep in the snow. He looked for them until he reached a place known as Hylea. There he met the she-monster Echidna, half woman and half snake from around the waist. "I've his mares," she said, "but I won't give them back unless he sleeps with me." Since he had no other choice, Hercules accepted her offer. As a result of their relationship, 3 boys emerged from their marriage: Agathyrsus, Gelonus, and Scythes. She inquired of Hercules what he wanted her to do with their sons when they reached adulthood. Afterward, he gave the bow and belt to her with instructions to give the throne to the boy most capable of drawing the bow and putting on the belt. Scythes, the youngest, was the only one who could manage to wear the belt and draw the bow. He thus became the first Scythian king. Hera went to great lengths in her final attempt to stop him close to Greece. She released an insect called a gadfly, oistros, onto the herd of cattle. Heracles' cattle dashed off wildly after the gadfly bit them. The panicked animals fled every way they could, with some ending up in Thrace. Herculean effort was required to herd them all back together once more. He eventually found and brought the majority of the animals back to the other side of the Hellespont. A few of the escaped cattle were believed to have given rise to feral herds in the area. Hercules endured a difficult journey over many months or even years before returning to Mycenae with the prominently red bovines from Geryon. He presented them to Eurystheus. Eurystheus used the special cattle simply to spite Hercules and offered them to the goddess Hera as part of a ritual sacrifice. Nonetheless, Hera accepted Hercules' offering knowing it, failed to appease her animosity towards him. This feat was Hercules' ultimate demonstration of strength, courage, and the stamina to triumph over massive obstacles in a journey covering all known lands. Nevertheless, Hercules was now tasked with completing 2 additional exceedingly challenging labors despite already fulfilling the initial 10. The 11th labor, the Apples of the Hesperides. Undertaking his 11th labor represented a tremendous challenge for Hercules, requiring more than just brute strength, but also knowledge of faraway lands and interactions with otherworldly beings who had spent countless millennia ruling the universe. He ordered Hercules to gather the gold apples that rested in the Garden of the Hesperides. These were no ordinary apples. At the request of Hera, Gaia had presented the golden apples to her daughter when she became the Queen of Olympus. She then enshrined them deep in the Garden of the Hesperides, which rested at the furthest edge of Earth beside lofty Mount Atlas. They bestowed both immortality and the promise of a prosperous life to anyone who ate them, making them desired but difficult to obtain. The daughters of Atlas, called Hesperides, were the protectors of the sacred garden and the tree. A terrifying dragon with 100 heads named Ladon watched over the tree. He was the son of Typhon and Echidna, or of Phorcys and Ceto. The initial challenge for Hercules was tracking down the exact whereabouts of the Garden of the Hesperides, since its hiding place was kept hidden by those who guarded it. He traveled extensively to many countries in search of any available clues. Whilst traveling through Illyria or by the Eridanus River, Hercules met a group of nymphs who were descendants of Zeus and Themis. The nymphs suggested that he should track down Nereus, an experienced sea god who possessed the only information about how to reach the enchanted garden. Hercules came across Nereus sleeping on the seashore. He grabbed hold of the god and then was faced with an ever-changing shape-shifting creature who metamorphosed from water into fire, appearing as a lion, a serpent or a leopard in an attempt to evade Hercules' firm hold. Hercules didn't let go of Nereus until the god changed back into his original shape and confessed that he would now disclose the location of the Garden of the Hesperides. Some stories tell that Nereus instructed Hercules on how to gather the apples from the garden. Hercules then moved forward along the road, encountering many additional challenges along the way. An important meeting took place when Hercules faced Antaeus in Libya. Antaeus was a massive figure who was the offspring of Poseidon and Gaia. He could only be defeated as soon as he lost connection with Gaia, the source of his strength. Antaeus would confront every traveler he crossed and strongly wrestle them down to the ground until he broke their necks to form a monument for Poseidon out of their skulls. Hercules accepted the challenge. Whenever Hercules slammed Antaeus to the ground, he would get up immediately and be even more powerful than before. Hercules understood how Antaeus gained his invincibility. He then picked Antaeus up and held him aloft, cutting off his supply from the earth and squeezed him to death with enormous strength. In Egypt, he came face to face with King Busiris, the offspring of Poseidon. Busiris had a cruel custom. It was ordained that a famine would be alleviated only if he offered a foreigner to Zeus annually. Therefore, anyone who came into his kingdom became the victim of his savage acts. When he realized that the citizens would sacrifice him, he allowed them to do so. At that very moment, Hercules freed himself and fought loudly against Busiris and the priests, putting an end to their cruel rituals. Traveling to either east or north, Hercules came upon the Caucasus Mountains. He came upon the Titan Prometheus, who was bound to a rock. Prometheus had been tormented continuously for taking the gift of fire and sharing it with people. Each day, a great bird of prey would fly down and tear away a piece of Prometheus's liver, which would grow back in full by nightfall. Then, the next morning, another bird would arrive and repeat the process from the previous day. Hercules pitied Prometheus and felt a connection with him as one who stood up to the gods and brought aid to humanity. To rescue Prometheus, he used an arrow to slay the vulture that each day pecked out Prometheus's liver. Touched by Hercules' generosity, Prometheus told him the secret to getting the golden apples. Instead of trying to retrieve the apples personally, Hercules convinced Atlas, who supported the sky and was the father of the Hesperides, to get them for him. Hercules carried out Prometheus's instructions and eventually arrived at the spot where Atlas labored with the heavens at his shoulders. Hercules shared with Atlas the details of his mission and the words of advice by Prometheus. In return, he asked Atlas to go and get him 3 apples from the Garden of the Hesperides while Hercules safely held the sky for a while. Atlas gladly accepted the offer since he had been looking for some relief from his endless hardship. He slowly transferred the burden of the heavens onto Hercules' incredibly powerful shoulders. The weight was immeasurably heavy, yet the strength of Hercules enabled him to bear it for a while. Atlas went into the garden. He either convinced the Hesperides to relinquish the apples or he picked them himself, possibly with the help of placing the dragon Ladon under a spell or by accounts where Hercules needed to slay Ladon first before Atlas would go. When Atlas brought back the 3 beautiful golden apples, he suddenly devised a clever plot. He was so relieved from the pressure that he requested to give the golden apples to the king instead of Hercules. Hercules certainly looked disappointed, but he kept his cool. He gave a similar response to Atlas but followed it with what seemed like a fair negotiation. He pleaded with Atlas to give him some respite so that he could prepare himself for the task by way of adjusting his clothing or using whatever means available to make the toil more tolerable. Accordingly, Atlas easily allowed the wily hero access to the fruit of the earth because he couldn't imagine Hercules turning on him and, perhaps, because he was feeling quite content with his own wisdom. He placed the apples back on the ground before reassuming the burden of the sky. As soon as Atlas was once again bearing the weight of the sky on his shoulders, Hercules promptly grabbed the apples, nodded to Atlas and left, ensuring that the Titan would have no respite from his unremitting task. Hercules carried the extraordinary golden apples back to King Eurystheus at Mycenae. Seeing these gods among men left the king both awestruck and filled with dread. He was completely at a loss as to how to handle the situation. Hercules refused, knowing that the apples were meant for the deities. The golden apples were eventually entrusted to the goddess Athena. Realizing the significance and original ownership of the golden apples, she decided to put them back in the Garden of the Hesperides under Hera's care, since mortals were only meant to temporarily guard and handle them. Hercules demonstrated both cleverness and physical prowess in completing the 11th labor, overcoming the powerful mind of a Titan. Only one labor now remained. The 12th labor, Cerberus, the Hound of Hades. The king set the 13th secret task for Hercules, meant as the leader of deadliest and most difficult challenges, and made it clear that this one would end all labors. He was required to venture into the underworld, the domain of the dead overseen by Hades and Persephone, and seize the three-headed guardian dog there, known as Cerberus. Comparable to the dreadful monsters birthed from Echidna and Typhon, Cerberus possessed 3 dog-like heads, with glaring, sharp-toothed faces. His tail was as long and coiled as that of a snake. His neck and shoulders were covered in thrashing serpents, and his paws ended in sharp claws plucked from the hands of a lion. He emitted a deep bellow like thunder, and his foul exhales might have contained deadly venom. He protected the entrance to the underworld, blocking the exit for those who had died and barring access to those still living. The netherworld would unquestionably fill a brave warrior's heart with dread as he tried to best the beast that guarded the underworld. Hercules wanted to be initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries before embarking on the terrifying quest to the underworld. These mysteries, held at Eleusis in Attica, were intended to help initiates gain insight into life, death, and the afterlife, and to equip them with protection or aid should they need it during their journey to Hades. He recognized that, technically speaking, the blood of the slaughtered centaurs he accidentally, or perhaps unintentionally, killed still associated him with bloodshed and would require a ritual cleansing. The founder of the mysteries, Eumolpus, cleansed him. Afterward, he was accepted as a member of both the lesser and greater mysteries. He trusted this process would set him up for his descent in every way. Hercules was guided by Hermes, the psychopomp, and usually traveled along with Athena, on their way to locate a gateway to the underworld. No single passage from Homer's epics describes exactly how Hercules entered the underworld. His path was lit by the dim light of the blazing torches as he walked onwards. When he passed, all that breathed shuddered and took flight at the sight of him still alive amidst infernal realms. He encountered several notable figures. He found his friend Theseus and Theseus's partner Pirithous, both of whom had been imprisoned among the dead. They attempted the impossible by coming down to kidnap Persephone so Pirithous could wed her. Hades persuaded them to choose the chair of Budicosm or bound them solidly, never to reawaken again. He succeeded in rescuing Theseus by pulling him away from his lock, but he struggled to free Pirithous and learned Hades wanted this not to be, so Pirithous stayed in the underworld. He spoke with the ghost of Meleager, the hero of the Caledonian boar hunt. The spirit of Meleager informed Hercules about his sister Deianira and recommended that he consider marrying her. Hercules was impelled to shed the blood of Hades's animals by whatever motive compels those who seek to please the spirits or make a blood sacrifice. Menoetes, or Menoetius, was the first to stand in his way. They grappled and Hercules snapped some of Menoetes' bones. Persephone stopped the fight just as Hercules was about to crush his opponent's ribcage. Hercules advanced to the throne of Hades and his formidable wife, the enthroned ruler of the underworld. Hercules respectfully stated his mission. Eurystheus had ordered him to bring Cerberus from the underworld back into the light. Hades consented to let Hercules take the three-headed dog home, on the condition that he capture it by his own strength with no weapons. Hercules was required to overcome the terrible Cerberus in a battle fought with his own 2 hands alone. Many believe that Persephone took an interest in Hercules and regarded him favorably either because he had been initiated in Eleusis or because of his remarkable valor. Hercules accepted the challenge. He faced Cerberus, who bared his sharp teeth and was shaking the long tails of its serpents. The serpents on its back spilled poison into the air in warning. Hercules remained unfazed as he encountered the beast of Hades, fighting it with his body armored by the Nemean lion's hide. Strongly grasping its 3 heads, Hercules used every ounce of power. As the ferocious dog strained to break free, his head snapped and bared viciously sharp teeth while his claws scratched with all their might. One mouth may have sunk its teeth into him, but the lion's hide protected him. It didn't matter that Ladon's poison sputtered from his own jaws, as Hercules was protected from even such deadly influences. The hero's tight grip wore down the daunting canine. The exhausted dog finally gave in and quietly lay still. Others claim that the middle head was the fiercest and he tightened his hold around that neck. Having successfully subdued Cerberus with the help of either a chain given by Hades or one of his own making, Hercules set about an excruciatingly difficult mission, hauling the tri-headed monster from the darkness of the underworld into sunlight. For the first time exposed to sunlight, Cerberus churned and dripped slaver in agony and torment. Plants considered poisonous by ancient Greeks were said to grow wherever Cerberus' saliva touched the ground. He dragged the 3-headed beast the entire distance from Elysium back to Mycenae. Eurystheus was as terrified to see Cerberus as a competent seer or astrologer might have foreseen. He was beyond terrified. He was utterly terrified at the very sight of the hound who guards the gates of the underworld. He cried out, begged profusely, and bolted once more into the bronze jar, praying to Hercules to dispatch the demonic dog at once. Having triumphed over the threat of death itself, Hercules obediently repatriated Cerberus to his duty at Hades' gates and the underworld. It may be assumed that Hades acknowledged that all the terms of their arrangement had been fulfilled now. Hercules' epic trials were finally, absolutely finished. Hercules had overcome death, tricked the mightiest of gods and titans, banished the foulest of contamination, and vanquished every sort of horrible creature entrusted to him. He traveled to the farthest reaches of the world and braved unprecedented danger and difficulty in order to accomplish what he was tasked with. By relying on his immense power, great valor, determination, and on rare occasions, his cleverness, he met and surpassed all that the oracle had spoken. The murderous sins of his clan were expiated and the doors to eternal life were now set before him. Eurystheus' reactions had no more bearing on the outcome of Hercules' struggles. He was relieved from his status as a servant to Eurystheus. A man with qualities like Hercules would never be happy living out his days peacefully. His quests and exploits would continue to occupy his days. According to Greek myth, numerous ventures, battles, and interpersonal events would follow Hercules' famous 12 labors before he was elevated to godhood. Though he was free from Eurystheus, Hera still cast a dark shadow on his life, and the impulsive heroism within him ensured that new adventures and challenges awaited him. There were countless challenges and opportunities awaiting Hercules in the world. Despite emancipating himself from the king, Hercules' troubles were far from over. Hercules continued to face testing challenges and powerful emotions while haunted by the grudge of Hera. He gained a great deal of fame for settling scores with those who had harmed him. Augeas, who had broken his words by refusing to pay for the stable's cleaning, was the top name on Hercules' hit list. Hercules unified a huge force and launched an expedition to take on Elis. Yet his first expedition ended in defeat, due to the valorous efforts of the Molionides, twin sons of Poseidon whom Zeus joined together from head to foot. However, during the invasion, Hercules suffered an injury and had to withdraw. He eventually caught and killed the Molionides at the city of Cleone. Then, having disposed of the Moliones, Hercules led his forces to victory in a second attack on Elis. Augeas and his sons were all put to death by Hercules, with the exception of Phyleus, who had aided Hercules and was made the new ruler. As a result, Hercules founded or revived the Olympic Games as a way to pay tribute to his father Zeus or to Pelops. He took part in a number of competitions and emerged victorious in most of them. He also wanted to take revenge on King Laomedon of Troy. Sometime in the past, before he faced his labors, Hercules, together with Poseidon and Apollo, helped Laomedon construct the walls of Troy. Laomedon had agreed to compensate each king with something special. Zeus had awarded him, he became the founder of his own royal house. Like Augeas, Laomedon refused to honor his debt and failed to keep his promises. After completing his labors, Hercules brought a small force of ships and warriors, including Telamon, to Troy. He quickly conquered the city. He sacrificed Laomedon and all his sons but allowed Podarces to live, as his sister Hesione had paid his life with the only thing she had to offer, her golden veil. Podarces was renamed Priam the Ransomed and took over as king of Troy, the very same Priam who would lead Troy during the Trojan War. Hercules presented Hesione to Telamon as a prize of honor. Hercules experienced just as Manur's ups and downs in his love life. After the loss of his first marriage, Hercules looked for another woman he could call his wife. A competition featuring the country's best bowmen began in the kingdom of Oechalia, with King Eurytus organizing it. To anyone who defeated him and his 3 sons in an archery competition, Eurytus announced that he would give his daughter Iole in marriage. He proved to be an undefeated archer by easily outshooting Eurytus and his sons. Still, Eurytus, having regarded what had happened to Linus and concerned that another tragedy could strike his family, chose to deny Hercules his daughter despite his accomplishment. Most of Eurytus' other sons were in agreement with him. Iphitus firmly insisted to his father that a promise should never be broken. Hercules left Oechalia in anger. Not long after, valuable mares from Eurytus' stables were stolen by the infamous thief Autolycus, who had himself taught wrestling to Hercules. Nonetheless, Eurytus falsely blamed Hercules for the crime. His son Iphitus set out to find Hercules and convinced him to help look for the stolen cattle, so his father's reputation would be restored. Iphitus found Hercules in Tiryns. Hercules initially welcomed him, but again seized by a rageful state, according to some, because Hera drove him mad, while others suggested that he was already vulnerable due to the events and the motivations behind them. Hercules brought Iphitus to the top of his fortress and either ignored his attempts at justification or cast him from the tower, while Iphitus searched elsewhere for the missing animals. Slaying Iphitus, who was his guest and friend, was most disgraceful, and Hercules incurred even more pollution. He became seriously ill and hoped the oracle at Delphi could provide both cleansing and healing. The priestess refused to answer him due to his blood sin. Awakened by rage, Hercules angrily vowed to level the temple of Apollo. He boldly took the tripod and tried to claim that he was a rival prophet. Apollo personally opposed Hercules when it came to disputing over the tripod. Zeus was forced to stop the fight, striking with his lightning bolt so the conflict would end. Apollo finally relented and told Hercules what he must do. The only way to remove his sickness and cleanse himself of the crime against Iphitus was to be sold as a slave for a year or 3 years, depending on the tale, and the fee from his sale would be paid to the descendants of the deceased. Hermes performed the task of conducting the sale with those conducting the transaction. The powerful hero Hercules, the demigod's son of Zeus, was traded to Omphale, queen of the province of Lydia in Asia Minor. She was a strong and unpredictable queen. Hercules had to endure his enslavement with great embarrassment. She found great entertainment in seeing the world's strongest man do labor customary for her female subjects. He dressed in women's apparel of gold and silk and was ridiculed by Omphale, who stuck the lion pelt on her back and swaggered with Hercules' club at her side. He spun wool and finished off the yarn while being laughed at and ridiculed by the handmaidens of Omphale. Nonetheless, Hercules accomplished great feats during the years he served Omphale. He got rid of numerous troubles in Lydia, including some trickster tree spirits called Cercopes, killed Silius, who required people to labor for him, and vanquished a band of brigands known as the Itoni, who were preying on Omphale's domain. It's also been believed that Omphale came to see Hercules' greatness, loved him, and gave birth to their sons, Lamus or Agelos, among others. Omphale set him free, and Hercules then traveled from Lydia healed and with his guilt finally absolved. He still yearned to possess Iole as his wife. He returned home and immediately headed toward Oechalia in order to seize her and punish Eurydice for his past offenses. After defeating the city and slaying his adversaries, he seized Iole and meant to keep her as either a lover or a spouse. Her longing for Iole brought about the events that would end Hercules' life. After defeating Eurydice and taking Iole, Hercules planned to worship Zeus Cineas and thank him at Cape Sinium. Lycus returned to Trachis to tell Deianira the news. Hercules had met Meleager in Hades and made him a vow to wed his sister. He had gained her in marriage as a result of overpowering the shape-shifting Hercules, who also wished to make her his bride. As a result of his victory over Hercules, Hercules possessed the first cornucopia. She was fiercely loyal to Hercules and yet fearful of losing him. News of Hercules' triumph and the presence of new women captured from Oechalia traveled to Hesperia along with Lycus. Seeing the beautiful Iole for the first time, Deianira started to worry that Hercules would desert her for the young princess. She let her envy and worries begin to grow. Only at that moment did Deianira think back to an important gift she had once been given. They'd crossed the raging Ivenus River not long after their marriage. Nessus was servicing as a crossing guide at this moment. Nessus said he would carry Deianira to the other side while Hercules walked under the water. Hercules agreed. Nessus, carried away by desire, tried to rape her halfway across the river. Hercules instantly removed an arrow from the quiver of his gauntlet, Baucase, and killed Nessus by shooting him with one of his hydra-poisoned arrows. Before he died, Nessus determined to retaliate on Hercules after Hercules killed him. Just before dying, he instructed Deianira to gather his blood and any of his semen that had fallen on the ground, and to save it. He deceived her by persuading her that the liquid was a powerful love charm, and if ever love between them appeared to cool, all she had to do was spread some of it on his clothing. Led by Nessus' final words and perhaps already doubting her husband's enduring feelings, Deianira secretly gathered the blood from his wound and kept it hidden. Years after, as her husband's attentions turned to the captivating Iole, Deianira's mind went back to the charm she had once heard from Nessus. She resolved to use the charm to reignite their marriage and keep him loyal. She obtained a beautiful robe and covered its interior with the liquid that Nessus had given her. She told her servant, Lycus, to bring the robe to Hercules and explain that he should wear it at the sacrifices during the games. Capitum sent by Lycus, Hercules received the robe at Cape Sinium. Happy with the gift from his wife, Hercules slipped the beautiful robe over his shoulders and readied himself for the ceremony. When Hercules drew near the fires, the heat ignited the poison the centaur had passed on to him by smearing it under the robe's lining. The poison spread quickly through Hercules' body. Hercules was overcome by unimaginable pain the very moment he put on the robe. Hercules' body was consumed by intense and excruciating pain, as though it was ablaze. The garment clung to Hercules so tightly that as he tore at it, pieces of his own skin came off with each piece of fabric, joining the hydra venom that had been sewn into the fabric. Hercules was in such agony that it surpassed anything he had ever felt even in his greatest encounters against ferocious beasts. A terrible anguished cry rung out as he howled in distress. Seizing upon his tortured state, Hercules turned to Lycus, the innocent bearer of the garment that would lead to his death, and violently threw him into the sea. From that moment, the seas of Lycus became perpetually symbolized by the appearance of rocky islands. The Hydra's poison couldn't be cured and kept battering Hercules unforgivingly. The great Hercules burned with unimaginable pain as the entirety of his powerful body was overtaken by Nessus' poison. He had the full realization that he was experiencing a painful and protracted death. He pulled up trees in his agony and vainly tore away at the flames that had seared his clothes to his skin. She was devastated when she found out that the present she gave Hercules would cause him unending anguish and eventually take his life. She chose to end her life either by hanging or by using a knife. Hercules was certain that death was imminent and incapable of suffering any longer. He instructed those around him to take him to Mount Ida. There, he asked them to build a huge funeral pyre. He mounted the pyre and requested that someone set it ablaze in order to free him from the agony that had plagued him. However, nobody had the courage to light the pyre on behalf of Hercules. Philoctetes, or perhaps his father, Poeas, stepped forward and offered to help. He was a faithful follower as well as an accomplished archer experienced with the bow and arrows used by Hercules. Freeing his friend from grief, Hercules gave him the hero's famous bow and hydrovenom-tipped arrows, weapons that would prove indispensable during the Trojan War. The sky darkened and a storm raged as the fire devoured the mortal Hercules. Zeus refused to let his mighty son die completely. He struck the pyre with his lightning bolt, and Athena carried Hercules up to Mount Olympus in a golden chariot. The animosity between Hercules and Hera was finally resolved on Mount Olympus. He had finally made peace with Hera, either by undergoing hardship on earth or simply because he had become a deity himself. He was acknowledged as one of the immortals. For all eternity, his life would remain everlasting. As a final gesture of uniting with his family, Zeus married him to Hebe, daughter of Zeus and Hera. On Mount Olympus, Hercules was reunited with the gods and lived out the remainder of eternity in happiness and honor. Hercules' tale reaches its end, a life of such human and divine exploits, beset by destructive passions and religious punishment and culminating in an excruciating end that, nevertheless, paved the way for him to become a god. His fame was synonymous with the qualities of might, determination, and overcoming all obstacles. He was revered as both a mortal and divine hero, revered as a defender of humanity and an enemy of every evil foe. He's long been remembered across the ages for inspiring stories of the struggles and triumphs of both man and God. Lay your burdens down as you slumber, comforted by the memory of his great deeds and his earned place among the gods.